What is up, YouTube? N64 fun time coming at you today. This is actually just going to be a quick request video. I'm actually just going to be tearing down an N64 controller. Somebody wanted to know how to do this, so I'm just going to do this really quick to show you guys how to do it properly, and a few things maybe to look out for. A few things you'll want to know this for is, one, either replacing your stick. There are some replacements out there. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Or just stick maintenance or button maintenance or anything like that. So this is actually a really important thing to know if you are not familiar with this. So let's just take it apart, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that. I won't speed up anything, that way you guys can see the whole process, and we'll go from there. Here we go. Alright guys, so here we go, taking apart our N64 controller. One of the things I like if you're doing any sort of console stuff or small screw stuff is, I can't recommend this style of screwdriver enough. It's just a Phillips head. It's actually reversible, but what this is it's got a really nice grip on it. It's really precise, and this head spins. What this does is you can actually set it in your hand and kind of rotate it, and the top will rotate, and then this you know, you can unscrew these little screws a lot faster. It just makes it so much easier. Now, I did cheat a little bit, and I did loosen my screws just to save a little bit of time, but you have to loosen all of these screws here, and then there are actually two screws way down in here that you may forget about, but there's two screws. You need a little screwdriver. Let's see if I can tip up. Ooh, things are so hard to do backwards. Down here and down there, you see little black screws. You have to undo those as well. And those are actually pretty long screws. But let's just finish taking these screws all the way out. Like I said, I did get these. If you haven't done this before, these might be kind of hard to come out. And then another thing too is, if you're not good about remembering screw placement, one thing that I can absolutely 100% recommend is take pictures of everything. Now, this actually lifts off if you've done it correctly. Like I said, these are really long. If you take pictures, because you don't want to forget where screws go. That's the biggest mistake you can possibly do if you're not familiar with where things go. Some of these screws are the same size, some of them are different size, so it's easier or harder to do, but that's my recommendation. Take pictures of everything as you're going along, just to help yourself out, really. Totally thought I had all these all the way. Make sure all your screws are out all the way. Now, if you lift, you can usually just lift this off and leave all the screws in place. So that's what I'm trying to do now. I don't want to dump it over and lose all my screws. So I just lifted that off, and all the screws are still right where they need to be, which is really, really nice. So if you want to get to the board, there's a few things that you need to do. You can remove your buttons here. These are very easy to remove, your L and R, and get those out of the way. And then there's the rubber things. If you ever need to take the buttons apart, it's actually really easy. It comes apart really easy. And I'll actually just do that. I'll actually just take the whole thing apart. So these just come off really easily. I like to keep everything nice in order. They're on the same side. And then the thing that will give you some trouble if you're taking apart your controller all the way is this cable coming in right here. They actually have it coiled in through here, and they do that for a reason. If it gets pulled, it's not pulling directly on these wires right here. So this actually just lifts right out, and it just kind of coils around there, and sometimes that's a pain in the butt to get in, so don't straighten that out. And then these lift out right here, and then you can actually just pull this all the way out to get to your buttons. But let's say you want to remove your joystick, which is this right here. There's 3 screws that you need to take out. They are silver screws. This screw right here, this black screw, do not take this one off, because this one will actually separate the joystick cup. You don't want to open that right away. So you want to only remove these 3 silver screws right here, and we'll do that in a second. But what you can do is you want to just wiggle off your Z trigger here, and like I said, if you don't know what you're doing, take pictures. So I'm going to remove the rubber there, and then this actually just lifts off to the side. And like I said, take pictures as you go. So our Z trigger is removed, and all we have is our joystick cup here, and then this comes off. We need to unhook our joystick, which if you kind of grab the cables a little bit and kind of start wiggling it out, you can typically start to wiggle it out. I don't recommend pulling on them, and once you get them out enough, you can actually just use your fingernail and just get this off. So now that you have your joystick unhooked and your Z trigger off, then you can undo your joystick. And like I said, silver screws, not the single black screw, or else you'll take apart your entire joystick and you'll have some problems. Now, why would you want to do this? Some of the things are just simple modification in painting, like this one right here. I took it apart, painted it nice and white and gold, and it looks beautiful. So I like to paint my joysticks and taking apart all the buttons and making it look pretty. Another thing is, I'm going to just set this off to the side. Another thing is actually replacing your joystick. I'm going to save my 3 screws here. And you can actually buy these aftermarket ones, maybe for about $10 to $15. I know a lot of people want to replace this because, let's see, this one's kind of loose. These get loose like this, and a lot of people would want to replace them, so that's kind of what people are doing. This one is extremely tight. This one is a real N64 one. It's very, very tight. I will say as a disclaimer, if you are replacing this with a third-party one, be aware that these are not going to be as sensitive as the Nintendo 64 original, the actual Nintendo branded ones. There are dead spots in the replacement ones, so just be aware of that. You won't notice it too much if you know, if you're not super hardcore into it a lot, but if you're doing really precise movements, you'll notice that you actually need to move it over a little bit before it starts to read. So there's a little bit of a dead spot in those third-party ones, so just be aware of that. So like I said, if you are replacing it, the easiest thing to do is, now that we have this off, we just basically put everything back together. So you're going to put your new joystick in here, and then you're going to add your 3 screws, your 3 silver screws back, and then make sure to plug this in, and make sure you're plugging it in the correct way. Now, I don't know what third-party ones look like, but the thing that this one is doing is there's a white cable, or a different colored cable, and that is going to be to your left, your far left. So just map that out and make sure you're plugging this in correctly. In theory, you shouldn't be able to plug this in the wrong way, but I suppose it is a possibility. I don't know how the third-party ones are, but just make sure you're plugging this in the right way, or this is not going to read. And then make sure you hook your Z trigger up appropriately, and then put your rubber back on, and then screw that back down, and then just do everything in reverse again. Now, we can take this a step further. Let's say you're not replacing this per se, and if you are replacing this, you can turn the video off there. That should be good for you. But let's say you're taking apart this and you want to grease this. That's where this black screw comes in. Now we can undo this black screw. And this is where it gets pretty tricky. This is where, if you're unfamiliar with this process, you need to start taking pictures, because this will get confusing very quickly. This actually pulls up, and then it's got tabs here, and you have to pull it up and then kind of pull it out like this to release these tabs. And this is basically spring loaded, so once you kind of get this off, this can go to poop really quickly. And then you have your board that comes out with your sensors in it. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you're doing everything back the way it was. So the best thing to do is, like I said, to take pictures of it. So that's the top, and you're just going to flip it over. You have a spring. You have your spring. Let's see if I can focus on that. Your little spring plastic. and then your joint that comes through this slot here, and then your pivot joint. And there's actually two pivot joints. There's, you know, a Y and a X axis, and then that one sits in the cup going this way. So it's kind of weird how it's set up, but if you can think about it, when this sits to the top like this, you're moving this axis and then this axis, and then the cup, I'm not explaining this very well, but just make sure you're setting this up back correctly, because this can be a pain in the butt. And actually, once you have it tore down this far, this is where the grease comes in handy. I use a pretty heavy grease. You want to clean it out first. There's going to be a lot of dust in here where this end wears down. Clean the dust out, because that's just going to add more friction. And then I usually take a Q-tip with really heavy grease and grease the crap out of this. This is going to preserve, keep friction down, and it's also going to help your joystick just be quite a bit more glidey. That's a word. Anyway, if you need more assistance with this cup, this can be a pain in the butt. Let me know. I can do a little bit more detailed video with my camera a little bit closer for you guys. But now that we've torn it apart, let's just put it back together to show you guys that we can do that. So your board is going to go back in. Remember your board, and that just sets. There's only one way that this will set in, which is really nice that they allow you to do that. So your board's set in, your spring and everything is good to go. You want to put it in kind of so it's hitting that cup, and this is going to be a little less of an angle now that you've kind of taken everything apart. So you want to line that thing up and then kind of wiggle it down, and then these will kind of slowly kind of pop, wiggle it, and kind of work it down. Like I said, this is kind of a pain in the butt getting everything back together. There we go. Nice and tight joystick. And then you got to squeeze this back together because there's the spring. You take your black screw back in, and like I said, I explained this really poorly with this joystick cup, but I'll do a little bit better video on that. Joystick goes back in, plug our joystick back in, 3 screws, when this is boring, you can cut the video off here if you feel comfortable with this process, but I'm just going to do the whole thing just in case you're unsure. So you're putting your Z trigger back, make sure you're putting it in correctly, and then you put your pad back in. Sometimes this can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to get in, but if you do it a few times, it should be good. And then you're putting these back in, and those just rest in there. The long end just goes in where that hole is. It's pretty easy. And then make sure that your cord goes in correctly. So basically it wraps just like that. It goes in between these two and then up and around, and then you have to make sure it goes through this hole again. And then if you did your controller correctly, all you do is lift it straight up and then put it straight back down, and all your holes should be lined up perfectly. Sometimes what'll hang you up are your triggers, or if it's really hung up, it's probably your cable coming out the back. But you don't have to crank these down too, because then you just, if you're gonna read, oop, that fell out. if you're going to redo it, then, you know, you're just going to lose those anyway. So now I hate doing that. One of my black screws fell out where the jumper pack goes, because those are a pain in the butt to get back in. Alright, so those are all back in for the most part. And then don't forget your 2 jumper pack ones. Like I said, this screwdriver is just so nice, being able to spin the top like that. And then let's get this. If you have a magnetic one, that works out really well. Or if you're really having problems, you can basically just put it in upside down, which I'm going to do. Crap. Alright, I'm going to cut it off there. You have it back together, and it's working. So that's how you would either replace or maintenance your joystick. So yeah, I hope it was helpful. I hope it was useful. If you guys need to know anything more specific, I'll let you guys know. Awesome. N64 fun time. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I do a lot of fun stuff on there. And there you go. Be nice. Stay positive. Always be gaming.